Jimmy Page is one of those rare names in music history that even people who do not listen to rock have heard of at some point. Known for his extraordinary talent and his role as the founder of the legendary band Led Zeppelin, Page has often been described as a genius, an innovator, and even the greatest guitarist of his time. His riffs shaped rock music forever, and his influence can still be felt across generations of musicians today. Yet, behind the praise and the glittering career lies a story that is far less glamorous. Now, at 81 years old, the tale of Jimmy Page is not just one of musical brilliance, but also one of pain, controversy, and personal struggles that leave behind a truly heartbreaking image. To many, he is still the wizard of the guitar who brought magic to the stage, but to others, he is a man haunted by the darker sides of fame, by personal demons, and by the choices that shaped his life. This mixture of admiration and sorrow makes his life story something far more complex than the legend we see on the surface. It is this duality, the brilliance and the tragedy, that defines Jimmy Page's legacy today. The story of Jimmy Page's love affair with music begins in a rather mysterious way. As a child growing up in England, Page stumbled upon a guitar that would change his destiny forever. When he was only 12 years old, he found an old Spanish guitar in the house his family had moved into. No one knew where it had come from. The previous owners did not claim it, and his parents could not explain how it ended up there. This sense of mystery almost felt like fate, as if the guitar had been waiting for him. Intrigued, Page began teaching himself how to play, often practicing alone for hours at a time. Little did he know that this one instrument would push him onto a path that would make him one of the most famous musicians in the world. At that age, however, Jimmy did not see music as a serious career. He even told friends that he wanted to grow up and find a cure for cancer. But slowly, as he played, something in him shifted. Music began to take over, and while he continued his schooling, he found himself more and more pulled toward the guitar. This was the quiet beginning of a journey that would eventually lead to but also to struggles he never could have imagined at that young age. Jimmy Page's climb into the spotlight was not an easy or straightforward one. In his early years, he joined several different bands, but none of them lasted long enough to give him the fame he was chasing. Still, his extraordinary skill with the guitar did not go unnoticed. By the mid-1960s, he had become one of the most in-demand session guitarists in Britain, playing on countless recordings for other artists. His big break came when he joined the Yardbirds, a band that already had ties to other guitar legends like Eric Clapton and Jeff Beck. After the Yardbirds dissolved, Page decided to form a new group. That decision led to the creation of Led Zeppelin, one of the most iconic and influential bands in rock history. With Robert Plant's voice, John Bonham's powerful drumming, John Paul Jones's bass and keyboard skills, and Page's masterful guitar work, the band exploded onto the scene in 1968. Their sound was heavier, darker, and unlike anything people had heard before. Songs like Stairway to Heaven became cultural landmarks, while their concerts were described as electric, wild, and even dangerous in their intensity. For over a decade, Led Zeppelin ruled the rock world, releasing one-hit album after another and selling out arenas everywhere they went. Jimmy Page was at the center of it all, admired as both a guitar god and a creative visionary. But as the band's fame grew, so did the shadows around Page's life. While many rock stars in the 1970s were known for pushing boundaries, Jimmy Page's fascination with the occult set him apart. At the age of 15, he had come across a book by the infamous English occultist Aleister Crowley, titled Magic in Theory and Practice. Reading it felt like a revelation to him. He once explained that it simply clicked, and he felt as though he had found something that spoke to him on a deep personal level. From that moment, Page became obsessed with Crowley's writings and teachings, seeing him not as a dangerous figure, but as a misunderstood genius. This obsession would shape much of Page's image and work with Led Zeppelin. The band began to include occult symbols and mysterious artwork in their albums, sparking rumors that they were dabbling in Satanism. One of the most famous examples is Led Zeppelin's untitled fourth album, which features 4 symbols representing each band member. Page's personal symbol, often referred to as Zoso, came from an old alchemical text and has been linked to astrology and mysticism. Page even wore elaborate costumes featuring astrological signs and symbols during performances, most notably his famous dragon suit. While some fans loved this mystical imagery, others, especially religious groups, saw it as proof that Led Zeppelin was promoting dark, even evil influences. For Page, however, it was simply another way to express his fascination with the unknown and his desire to connect with something deeper than the ordinary. Unfortunately, this growing obsession with the occult also deepened the divide between Page and the wider public, painting him as a dangerous figure in the eyes of critics and contributing to the darker, more tragic side of his story. Page's interest in mysticism was not just a personal hobby, became part of his public identity. He even opened a bookshop and publishing house in London dedicated to selling rare occult texts, which he named the Equinox. Although the shop did not last long as a business, it symbolized how serious Page was about his passion for Crowley's work and other mystical writings. Fans who visited his shop often spoke of how unusual it was to see a rock star so deeply immersed in such material. Beyond business, Page's fascination continued to bleed into his music and stage presence. During concerts, his solos were often performed with dramatic flair, sometimes involving a violin bow and eerie sound effects that gave the performance a haunting atmosphere. Critics and fans alike began to associate him with something almost supernatural. This only fueled the rumors that Led Zeppelin's success was somehow tied to dark powers. Of course, these were only rumors, but in the highly charged cultural atmosphere of the 1970s, they took on a life of their own. Christian groups often condemned the band, calling their influence satanic, while fans embraced the mystery as part of the thrill of being connected to something forbidden. Unfortunately, for Jimmy Page himself, this growing identity as a figure linked with darkness and the occult contributed to his isolation. As much as he loved music, the shadows of mysticism and public fear followed him, creating a barrier between him and the more traditional audience that might have otherwise celebrated his genius without suspicion. If Page's obsession with the occult shaped his public image, his addiction to drugs shaped his personal downfall. Like many rock stars of his generation, Page turned to drugs in the 1970s, and soon his use spiraled into full-blown addiction. He admitted openly that drugs were an integral part of the whole thing for him, tied into the culture of music, touring, and creativity. But, as the years passed, the cost became painfully clear. Heroin became his drug of choice around 1975, during the recording of Presence. His manager, Richard Cole, later confirmed that by this point, Page was completely addicted. Fans began noticing his dramatic weight loss and his increasingly distant, cold behavior. On stage, his performances sometimes suffered, and he struggled to keep up the energy that had once defined Led Zeppelin's shows. Offstage, his relationships with fellow band members grew tense, and his absence from the studio during critical times hurt the band's momentum. Page's addiction was not just a personal struggle, it was a shadow that hung over the entire band. As much as Led Zeppelin was loved and admired, whispers of Page's drug use and erratic behavior were constant, damaging both his reputation and his ability to function as a leader within the group. This downward spiral made the eventual collapse of the band feel almost inevitable. Even after Led Zeppelin, disbanded in 1980, Jimmy Page's troubles did not disappear. He was arrested twice in the early 1980s for drug possession. Once in 1982 and again in 1984, both times, his status as a high-profile celebrity meant he escaped serious punishment. The first arrest resulted in a conditional discharge, while the second was resolved with just a fine. Still, these legal troubles painted a grim picture of a man unable to escape the grip of his addictions. At the time, Page strongly denied being an addict, often reacting angrily when interviewers suggested it. In one 1988 interview, he snapped at a reporter who linked his name to heroin, saying he did not look like an addict and did not want to be accused of it. Yet over the years, his stance softened. By the early 2000s, Page admitted more openly to his drug use, though he still insisted he had no regrets. He argued that when he needed to focus, he was capable of extraordinary discipline. pointing out how quickly some of Led Zeppelin's albums were recorded. Still, the damage had already been done. His legacy was now permanently tied not only to his brilliance as a guitarist, but also to his long struggle with addiction. A struggle that left scars on both his personal life and his public reputation. Today, at 81 years old, Jimmy Page is no longer the wild, mysterious figure he once was on stage. He lives quietly, rarely making public appearances compared to his peers, while other rock icons of his era continue to tour and release new music. Page has mostly retreated into the shadows, occasionally surfacing for interviews or special projects. This withdrawal has fueled a sense of sadness among fans who wish they could see more of the man who once defined an era of music. The tragedy of Jimmy Page at this age is not just about the past struggles with drugs or the controversies over the occult. It is about the sense of what could have been. Despite his genius, Page never truly managed to launch a consistent solo career after Led Zeppelin ended. Unlike his bandmates, who found ways to reinvent themselves, Page seemed forever tied to the legacy of Zeppelin, unable to move beyond it. His health and his past choices have kept him from returning to the stage in any lasting way. And the isolation of his later years contrasts sharply with the roaring crowds that once adored him. For many fans, this is the most heartbreaking part of his story, the silence after the storm. The loneliness of a man who once had the world at his feet, but now lives quietly with his memories. The legacy of Jimmy Page is complex, powerful, and deeply emotional. On one hand, he is rightly celebrated as one of the greatest guitarists who ever lived. His work with Led Zeppelin continues to inspire musicians across the world, and songs like Stairway to Heaven remain timeless masterpieces. On the other hand, his story is also one of loss and tragedy. His obsession with the occult alienated him from many. His addictions robbed him of his health and relationships, and his later years have been marked by absence rather than presence. At 81, the tragedy of Jimmy Page is not just about what he endured, but also about what fans feel has been left undone. We wonder what more he could have created if he had not been pulled into darkness, if he had found stability earlier, or if he had embraced his talents with fewer distractions. Yet perhaps this mix of brilliance and sorrow is what makes his story so human. He was not a perfect god of the guitar, but a flawed man who reached for greatness, fell, and left behind a complicated legacy that still moves people to this day. Jimmy Page's story is one that blends glory with tragedy. He gave the world unforgettable music, but he also gave the world a glimpse into the cost of genius, the loneliness, the struggles, and the pain that often hide behind the curtain of fame. At 81, his life stands as both a triumph and a warning, showing how brilliance can sometimes come hand in hand with heartbreak. The tragedy of Jimmy Page is not only in his past, but in the silence of his present. For fans, however, the love remains strong. His music continues to live on, louder than the controversies, stronger than the addictions, and more eternal than the passing years. Perhaps that is the real magic of Jimmy Page, that even in tragedy, his art shines through.